Welcome to this McGraw-Hill Education Learning Conference. I'm Tessa Hunt with McGraw-Hill Education, and I will be the webinar moderator for today's live Hangout. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items. This event is being presented in listen-only mode, which means you will be able to hear the presenters, but they won't be able to hear you. However, that doesn't mean you cannot participate. There will be polling questions throughout the presentation. In addition, you are welcome to type your questions in the Q&A panel on your screen throughout the session, and we will stop at different points to answer them. Joining us today are Mary Isley, Shawn Whiteman, Tara Hart, and Jamie Bressington. Mary is the Director of Product Management for the Direct Instruction product line at McGraw-Hill Education. For 25 years, Dr. Isley has partnered with schools and districts as educators implemented various direct instruction programs. As the author of Phonemic Awareness, Dr. Isley has produced resources including promotional videos, professional development tools, an online data management system, and additional materials to support literacy education. I'd now like to turn the session over to Mary.
Thank you, Tessa, and I'd like to welcome everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on McGraw-Hill Education's live Hangout. And I'm very happy to be here today to share with you about the secrets of a successful direct instruction implementation. I've had the great fortune over the past 20 plus years to work with a lot of districts and schools as they begin to implement our direct instruction programs. And we've learned a lot across that course of time. And so I really want to be able to share with you today what are the features that are behind those great successes. And later in the broadcast, I'll have several people joining me from the field. We'll have some folks from districts in both Florida and Michigan joining us to share about the challenges they faced as they've been implementing direct instruction, but also the solutions, and then obviously the successes that they've experienced. So as we get started, I want to find out a little bit about you. So if you will very quickly help me out with a poll, I want to find out what percentage of your students are not meeting grade level expectations. Is it below 25%, somewhere between 25 and 50%, or over 50%? So I'm going to wait for a few more people to log in here. You just click either below 25, between 25 and 50, or over 50. Okay, we'll go ahead and show you the results here. What we were able to share with you is you guys are falling right around in the national average. Now the national average sits at about 40% of students not meeting grade level expectations. But what we do know is a lot of schools and districts are challenged with a larger population, sometimes upwards of 60 to 70% of their students not meeting grade level expectations. And that's due to a variety of reasons, whether they're dealing with students that are higher at risk, be that due to socioeconomic issues or English being not their native language. And so these are schools and districts that are looking to do something different to achieve academic success with their students. So what we do know about the schools and districts that they have been successful using direct instruction. And the idea is what really makes one implementation show great gains in success when another school might be using the same exact direct instruction program but not showing that level of success. And what we've learned over the years is that there are several features that these highly successful schools engage in that help them to be more successful. Regardless of whether they use the direct instruction programs as a core math or reading basal program, or if they're using the programs as an intervention for students. So let's take a look at some of those features. So the first feature that we know that these schools engage in is that they target kindergarten and first grade specifically. Their success as a school or a district is largely dependent upon what happens for those students by the end of first grade. And we do know that they're targeting trying to reach all kids to be on grade level at the end of first grade. This really changes the makeup of that school from that point forward. And that notion of giving kids time to catch up, or waiting until they bloom, or whatever little saying they have about our 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, we know that that's an outdated and ineffective approach. We do know, and the research is very clear, that as quickly as we can get to those students in those very early grades, the faster we can bring them to grade level, and we can maintain that success over the course of their school career. But of course, this doesn't mean that you give up on the students in the upper grades. I don't want to make the claim that we're focusing on K-1 without focusing on our grades in students in grades 2 and above who are already falling below grade level expectations. It's never too late for those students. It just becomes harder. And in a few minutes, we'll look at why that waiting to do something can be much more difficult for a school district. And then we often deal with a lot of districts that tend to focus their attention on what I would call the grades where assessment counts. So whether that's a 3rd grade assessment, a 5th grade assessment, or an 8th grade assessment, a lot of times administrators may say, well, I put some of my best teachers at those grade levels because that's where the accountability and testing occurs. That kind of approach, unfortunately, doesn't help with long-term effects. We really need to hone in on those students as they enter kindergarten and into 1st grade where the gap is not as wide. So let's take a look at why we want to focus on that early intervention. Many of you may be familiar with the study that Hart and Risley conducted many years ago, and then wrote a book called Meaningful Differences about that. And it was really explaining why students come to kindergarten with such a varied, vast difference in their vocabularies. And what they simply found is that it didn't have to do with race or gender or birth order, but simply it came down to socioeconomic status. The students that were in that birth to 4 range, when they were observed in the homes, those students literally heard more words being spoken in that home. Upwards of over 40 million words in those professional families where the parents are well educated. When we look at even our working class families, you can see that there's already a difference between those two groups in terms of tens of millions of words. And then when you look at the students coming from the lowest socioeconomic households, we're looking at over a 30 million word difference in what they've heard prior to coming to school. And so this is the effect that it has as students then begin to enter into school. So what starts off here as really a very, what I would say, small and manageable gap when those kids enter school. We do know there's a vast difference between our kindergartners and 1st graders as they enter, but what we know is that over time the trajectory of their learning changes. Those students who came in from the professional households with that strong vocabulary background, basically their learning trajectory path is quite steep. Whereas when we look at the students who had that low oral language entering kindergarten, their trajectory is very, very different. And so by the time those students reach the end of elementary school, we're looking at about a 5-year difference in their performance in terms of reading growth. And I think we can say the same would equally be happening in math. So you can see that, again, it's never too late to intervene with students. It just becomes harder. Hence why we really want to focus on those students in kindergarten and first and close the gap as quickly as we can. So moving on to the second feature, and I'm sure that most of you will get a laugh out of this one, is more instructional time. I think when we ask our schools and districts what they wish they had more of, other than money and support, they want more instructional time. And I think the reality is for our school districts and schools is that business as usual just won't get the job done. When you're dealing with an at-risk population, particularly kids who are multiple grade levels behind, instructional time becomes very, very critical. If we're just going to devote 30 minutes a day, 3 days a week to intervention, there's no feasible way to catch those kids and close that gap. The same can be said if students are below grade level and you've only isolated 90 minutes for a reading block, when in actuality we should be looking at the deficit of the student. And the larger the deficit, we need to be looking at how much instructional time those students need in order to close the gap. So there are a few strategies that our schools actually engage in to help them get more instructional time. One of those is what we call double dosing. So these are where students are receiving more than one lesson within a school day. Obviously, we would love to have those lessons be consecutive. So we're doing 2 consecutive lessons and making quite a bit of ground. But there are occasions where that double dosing may be doing the same lesson when students are in need of additional support. And many of our schools have added time to their actual school day, sometimes mandated by the state or district, and that's another great way to get the double dosing in. I think the other thing that they do very, very well is they prioritize the instructional time. I've seen a lot of administrators work really hard to minimize all interruptions during the instructional block of time. That means holding announcements till later, scheduling field trips at another time, or assemblies. Really prioritizing and making that a very important time. And then the third bullet there is really making sure that you have an adequate time set for that particular program or level. The last thing you want to do is have a teacher give her a corrective reading group, so these are students well below grade level, and basically a 45 or 50-minute lesson, now you've only given them 35 minutes of instructional time. That becomes very difficult for the teacher because the choice becomes, what do I cut? What do I condense? What if my students aren't making progress? So you want to make sure that whatever programs you're implementing, whether it's reading mastery, connecting math concepts, essentials for algebra, that the adequate time is given to these teachers to complete a lesson a day. And that is a frustration we also hear from our teachers as well. So looking at the next feature, which is I think one of the most critical ones that we have, is monitoring student mastery. So I'm going to show you 2 sets of stairs here. And typically when I show this, I ask people why they might choose, which staircase would they choose if they wanted to be successful in getting to the top, and why would they do that. You can certainly type in your responses to the chat box on that. And typically the answers that I get are that the stairs on the left are very well designed. They look sturdy. There's an even progression between steps. There are no gaps. There's actually a handrail should I need additional support. And these things all remind me of direct instruction and teaching to mastery. It's about building a program that ensures that students can achieve at each lesson and build in that progression with success and no chance for failure. Versus the stairs on the right, which obviously you can see there's a very high leap just to get to the first step, and they're not well designed. There's a lot of opportunity for failure there and problems. So definitely looking at the staircase on the left. So when we talk about mastery, I think this is a great question to start with. It's another poll for you. I want you to think about this one very carefully. When a skill or concept is introduced in the direct instruction program for the very first time, students should be at least what percentage correct on that information? So please go ahead and log in, decide if you think it should be A, B, C, or D there, 50%, 70%, 90%, or 100%. So I'll give you just a moment. Again, remember this is when you're introducing a concept or skill for the very first time. Just a few more seconds. Okay, we'll post the results here. And it looks like about 40% said 50%, 47 said 70, a small percentage said 90, and no one said 100. Okay, so the answer is actually 70%. So let me talk to you about a little bit about this, and this really comes from Zig Engelman himself in explaining teaching to mastery. Students really should be at least 70% correct on information that's being introduced for the very first time. If students are really at the 50th percentile range, they could be there just based on guessing. So we want to make sure that they at least fall into the 70%. Remember, even though it's new information, it's usually based upon the previous information and skills and strategies they've been learning. So you expect some competency there by the students. The reason it's not higher, for example, 90 or 100% on that first time, is that would then tell you that the students find that information too easy if it's the very first time. In fact, if students consistently performed 100% on information that's new the very first time it's introduced, then we know that that content is too easy for students, and it might mean needing to accelerate their progress or move them to a different portion of the program where they're learning new information. We also know that students should be at least at 90% correct on skills that are taught earlier in the program. So remember, each lesson is based on some brand new content, but about 80 to 85% of previously taught content. And that should really be sitting in the 90% correct range. And then at the end of each lesson, all students should be virtually 100% firm on all tasks and activities in that lesson. That's really at the heart of the matter. And I think fourth, kind of going back to that instructional time, is the student error rates really should be low enough to ensure that the teacher can get through the lesson in sufficient time. If there are too many errors occurring, then the teacher's spending a lot of time working through correction procedures and won't be able to complete the lesson within the allotted time. And remember, mastery is really at the cornerstone of all of the direct instruction programs. It's the only guarantee that students are able to reach each stair or be in each lesson without failing and falling. That's really the idea here. But it's more important to understand that the benefits of the design are lost if the students don't achieve mastery. So a lot of time I'm asked, well, what happens if my students don't achieve mastery on today's lesson? So let's say we finish today's lesson at maybe 75% mastery. Well, as you move into tomorrow's lesson and you're now building on what they should have learned yesterday, you'll again experience a lesson with even less mastery. And while day 2 may not seem quite so bad, what will eventually happen over the course of the next 5 to 10 lessons is the lessons will take longer. The students will make more errors, and by the end of the second week, you'll have teachers and students that are both frustrated because they're not progressing through the content. So it's really critical to understand that that really is at the cornerstone of the program design. And I think it's also important to consider it as a challenge. Why is mastery so difficult? We hear this from a lot of our schools. And I think, number one, it's important to remember that it's very contrary to typical practices and expectations of how students perform. So consider a typical, I'm just going to say a typical third grade reading program in a classroom where we have all third graders in a third grade basal reading program. And the students basically, the teacher takes them through Unit 1. At the end of Unit 1 or Theme 1, they take an assessment. The results of that assessment often will be bell curve shaped. We'll have a lot of kids who probably captured the content and understood it. We may have some kids above the curve who possibly knew the information prior to even it being presented. And then we have students that are falling below and not achieving mastery with those skills. And in all honesty and in reality, we expect those teachers to basically move on to Unit 2. They're focused on moving through the content in a very predictable manner. Now, that's not to say that those teachers don't stop and do some type of intervention with the kids that are not progressing, but at the end of the day, their goal is to keep that group together and focus on the middle section of students and move them through the content to be successful in the year. And that's really not the direct instruction approach. We place kids based on their need and skill, and then we move them accordingly, always focusing on mastery. Which kind of leads to the second bullet. It forces teachers to be more accountable. You can't just move through content and expect some students to be falling off. It really makes teachers look at their data performance of their students and make changes when students aren't being successful. And we'll talk a little bit about that later as we talk about data and accountability. And then finally, I think it's also a little difficult because schools are not typically structured for this type of instruction. We tend to want to not move kids around, keep them with one teacher, possibly not allow for variances across the grade level. And so I think all of these lead to challenges to implement direct instruction, but there are certainly solutions that schools have been able to deal with and focus on mastery. So I mentioned earlier that another important key feature is having people implement the DI data management system. It's really your way of monitoring whether students are at mastery. And in my mind, all assessment that we give students should answer a question. And the assessments within the program, whether that's reading mastery or corrective reading or reasoning and writing, all of those assessments are asking the question of, are my students making adequate progress in their learning? In other words, these are curriculum-embedded assessments that directly tell the teacher whether the students are being successful with the content that they've just taught in the previous 5 to 10 lessons. So these are really critical for helping teachers make decisions on a daily basis about what they do in teaching the lesson. These aren't benchmarks to compare to an outside measure. It really is about what can I do today in my classroom, in my lesson, to change the progress of my students. And when we look at our successful implementations across the country, they use one data collection system for mastery. And so most people are using one of two methods. Either one, they're using our To Inform online data management tool, or they're using a paper pencil data notebook. One or the other, but within that school or district, everyone is using the same approach, and it's consistent across the board. And they typically follow 4 basic steps when they are dealing with that data. And so the first step that's most important is this frequent examination by a school leadership team. And that can be various members of that team depending on the size of the implementation. But that team meets frequently to look at lesson progress and assessment performance. And so you may have heard these called sharing sessions or data sharing meetings. And we typically encourage you to have that at least once every 4 weeks. Some schools do it as often as 2 weeks with very high risk populations, and some do it every 5 to 6 weeks. But finding a way to consistently meet to discuss about data within the school. And then obviously you need to, the second one is one that's often overmissed actually, is identify situations that are at desired levels and give and provide positive feedback. We tend to obviously want to focus where we need to make changes, but it's also just as important to identify for teachers when students are at the desired level and encourage them and explain that what you're doing is working. Continue to do that. Third, identify situations in which the progress is inadequate. Make a plan and implement the solution. The solution could be an additional lesson a day, it could be repeated readings for fluency, it could be more individual turns for a certain student. Whatever that plan is, document it and implement it. And then finally, the last step is to ensure that you monitor the proposed solution. When you come back to meet with that data team again, you should be discussing the results of those solutions and seeing if you were able to see progress improve. So as we kind of move into the next section here about what we also find successful in our school districts, we're going to move into the area of professional development, because it's one thing to be in the classroom teaching it, but how do we prepare our teachers to be able to deliver the program with the fidelity and the finesse that they need to? And that really comes down to me to 2 things: quality and quantity. You want to have quality training in place, but you also want quantity time spent on both training and practice. And I think I'd like to remind people that training is really just the first step. Training, that on-site hands-on training, while it's very intense and very active, it's really just the first step. It gives the teacher the insight into the program, practice teaching it, a way to ask questions, but really what makes the difference is what you do after training. And so our very top-notch implementations do what we call practice sessions. These practice sessions are when teachers get together in a group Most of the time it's teachers that are using the same level or similar levels, and they practice and work with each other, reading through the scripts, marking up their script, practicing and role-playing with each other. And these practice sessions should really occur early in the year before patterns and habits get set into place. And you have an opportunity to answer the teacher's questions, because if a teacher doesn't understand the rationale for, say, doing a certain correction procedure or a certain story format or a mathematical discussion or explanation, they're going to deviate and find another way around it. I think the other two things that these practice sessions do very well is, number one, lower the stress. Teachers have noted that they're less stressed about teaching the program when they can work with their peers and get this practice early on before working with students. And then it also develops a collaborative approach in your school system or within your school. It lets them know that they're not alone. This isn't an isolated incident of you implementing, but you're part of a team, and starts to build that collaborative approach. And I know my guest today will be mentioning some of that information as well that they're able to do. The other thing that our schools engage in beyond training is really utilizing in-class coaching. And I know that a lot of implementations, especially within the first year, utilize what we call outside consultants. So whether these are our McGraw-Hill education curriculum specialists, who are all very qualified and exemplary in their delivery and understanding of the program, we know that some schools also utilize our independent consultants, who are also distinguished as well in their work. But I think it's important to understand that an outside consultant can only go so far. They're not living with you on a daily basis. They can only be there and can provide support to a certain level. And what's more important is, how do you work on sustainability? How can you really build sustainability, particularly beyond year one? And one way to do that is to basically find and discover your model DI teachers. Who is in those classrooms? Who can you find that is teaching DI with fidelity and can talk about it and share those experiences? And then utilize those folks as a coach. And I talk about two roles for that. I know it's very difficult for some districts, but some districts are able to actually hire those exemplary teachers as a coach, as a literacy academic coach within the school, and then their primary role is to assist teachers throughout the day. If you're not able to do that, I think the other great option is to identify those teachers and allow that to be their secondary role. In other words, they teach day to day, but you may hire a substitute to come in and free them up for a day or two every couple of weeks to go out into the classrooms and provide that coaching model. And again, it builds that sustainability over time so that you can stand on your own feet and work on raising achievement within your schools. In addition to this, when we talk about training for our teachers, I think it's really critical to understand that we also have to focus on training and support for our building principals. And this could also be for our literacy coaches as well, and supervisors. But I think most importantly, the job of that administrator is to ensure that all of the elements, some of the ones we've discussed and some others, that they're being well implemented. And you see many of them there, whether that's professional development, placement testing of the students, grouping and flexibly moving students around, scheduling, the teaching of the program, the administration of the assessments, and the analysis of the data. That's a lot. So as a principal or administrator, you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of things that I have to have on my plate. But I think it's really to that building level person to ensure that all of those things are being well implemented. So how can you do that? There's 4 basic ways there at the bottom that I'd recommend. Number 1, when your teachers are being trained, attend the training. There's nothing better from the training point of view than to see a building administrator sitting with the teachers being trained hands-on. I will tell you, it builds camaraderie between the administration and the teachers, and it helps you to better understand as you go in and observe in those classrooms what you should be looking for. I'd also suggest attending a coaching or an admin session. Those are also wonderful places for you to learn more about how can I work with my teachers and what kind of things should I look for as I go in to do observations within the classroom, like using a walkthrough form. Then if you also have the opportunity, I'd strongly suggest, especially if you're very new in your implementation, that you go out and visit schools using direct instruction. Find people, you can contact your local sales rep, you can reach out to us, maybe your curriculum specialist. Find other schools that are using direct instruction and being successful and call out to them. Take a field trip. I can tell you we have lots of schools that love to have visitors come in and see what they're doing. Teachers and students love sharing their successes at any given time. And then partner with a successful site. If it is your first year, find another site that's been doing this for a couple of years, learn, listen to them when they talk about challenges and solutions, and certainly our guest today will be able to provide that for you. But I think those are all great ways to help you get off to a good start as an administrator overseeing this type of an implementation. And then we also want to go beyond just the school administration level. We also want to look at what can we do in terms of the district level leadership. And I think what we found over the course of the years is that when the district level leadership is focused on raising student achievement and they clearly communicate that that's their priority, things change. That's when change can occur, both systemic change at the district level and at the school level. But I think it's also important that we take a look at what they do further than that. When those districts are successful, not only is there data sharing happening within a school, but now there's data sharing at the upper level about how schools are doing toward the district goals. And so again, it's just data sharing at a different level and engaging upon that. And our To Inform online progress monitoring tool allows you to do that at a much easier level, as district people can get access to all the schools within the district and can also aggregate reports across those different schools and the different programs that they're using. I think we also want to make sure our district level leaders understand these features, the ones that we've talked about and many of the others that help an implementation become so successful. And then I think the last one is one I would just like to emphasize is beware of mixed messages on what is important. Sometimes as we begin an implementation, the strong communication behind it is this is the direction we're headed, we want everybody on board, we're improving student achievement. And then over time, other messages may be delivered from the district office on something else that becomes important. And then sometimes it's left to the schools, the administrators and coaches, to determine which of those messages is the one they should be listening to. Or something may be in direct conflict to something that they have to do specifically for the direct instruction implementation. That could be something as simple as time, that they know how much time they need to have allotted to an implementation, and the district may be indicating another block of time for that usage that maybe is not sufficient. So I think it's really understanding that from that top level, we need to be very careful about the messages we send to the districts and encourage them to do the things that will help them to be successful, and so that they can focus on those. So just as a reminder, these are what we call our secrets to success. So again, just to review, you want to target kindergarten and first grade. Again, not to put aside the kids in grade 2 or higher. We certainly want to do as much instructional time and focus on them as possible, but start early, intervene, and try and get the job done before those students leave first grade. Secondly, provide adequate instructional time. Make sure that teachers have the instructional time they need to implement the programs and levels that they have in their classrooms. Monitor student mastery. Remember, that's at the heart of the program and leads to its success. And you are monitoring that through some type of data management system that everyone is a part of, and that you're doing those sharing sessions and making decisions about students. Then moving to PD, make sure that you ensure that every teacher is trained well and that there are opportunities for practice primarily at the beginning of the year, but certainly ongoing. Find a way to deliver in-class coaching, whether that's employing an outside consultant to do that or building that sustainability, more importantly, interior. And allow training and support for your administrators. And then obviously the last one we just discussed, which is focusing district leadership on raising student achievement. So if I'm going to stop right here for just a moment, and I'm going to pull up my question box. And are there any questions before I turn it over to some of my guests? I'll see if there's a question in here. Okay, this one is, I teach 3 to 4 special education students. Students have been placed using the SR placement test into programs 2 grade levels below in reading mastery and in connecting math. What's the best way I can connect the grade level standards when they've been placed 2 grade levels below? It's a great question, and one we get often. There's a very strong emphasis, as you know, on teaching to grade level expectations. But I think the important thing to remember, as you noted in your question there, is your students are well below grade level. So we want to balance the time we spend on grade level standards, given that the students wouldn't necessarily have the pre-skills to be successful in meeting those standards. That's our goal. Think of that as the outcome. That's where we'd like to be. And reality is my students are 2 grade levels behind. It's important for you to try and accelerate that growth as quickly as you can. So wherever they're placing, make sure you're moving them as quickly through those levels as you can. I think the other thing to remember, especially when we're looking at some of the standards, is that if you kind of strip at the standards and look at them, let's say we had 4th grade students and we're looking at a standard within maybe something about narrative text. If you strip it back, you should see some alignment back into 3rd grade and 2nd grade. So it's not to say that you're not working toward content of that standard. You're definitely working on it, probably in a more simplified approach. But it's just about trying to make up that ground. What we do know is that if you spend, particularly with students that are that far below grade level, if we spend too much time focused on just grade level standards, we're not going to make the progress that we need to make. We need to hone in on where their skills are needed in order to be successful as we approach grade level. So I don't see any more questions. Tessa, I'm just checking to see if you sent any in. Okay. I'm just checking if you guys give me 1 second. Okay, we're all good. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Shawn Whiteman. He's going to actually share his success stories. He is a superintendent right now in Marysville Public Schools in the state of Michigan. So I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about himself and also tell you about the successes and challenges that he's faced in terms of implementing the direct instruction programs. So Shawn, I'll send it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to just let you know that I'm going to try and frame this so that from a practitioner's point of view, so if you have any questions or anything, you can send them out. I'll try to address them as I go. But there are a couple things I want to make you aware of. First and foremost, I'll give you a little bit of my background and everything. I've worked in public education for over 20 years. I started as a regular classroom teacher. I went from that position out into a Title I Section 31A coordinator in charge of at-risk grants and so on. Became an instructional specialist, a building administrator, now superintendent, as you know. I just want to make you aware that the direct instructional programs, I've done a lot of research on this. I got my doctorate degree in K-12 curriculum and instruction, and I want to make you aware that this research is significant. It's been around for many years. But with regards to implementation, that's one thing that you need to think about when you adopt a reading mastery program, connecting math concepts program. There's so many things that you deal with as a building administrator. You have to put a focus on it. For example, when you bring in a new program, you're going to have staff members that are going to be what's considered to be resistors. And these individuals are not going to necessarily believe direct instruction works very well. Some of them have a whole language background and so on. So you have to address those issues. I knew taking on the position that I went into in this particular school, bringing in direct instructional programs, that as soon as the data would be coming in, I knew that I would have these individuals who were resisting what it is that we were trying to accomplish, and the goal was to significantly, effectively, and rapidly improve student achievement. But once the data started rolling in, these resistors they started to jump and get on board. Another problem or issue that I found with the work that I've done is an issue with scheduling. You'll have kids, like for example in Reading Mastery, do what's called a walk to read program. That means kids leave their classes and go to their various levels to get the instruction that they need, because you may have students that are 1 to 2 grade levels below, like we had just talked about earlier, was just previously mentioned. They need to get the skills that they need so that they could be proficient in reading. Because again, literacy, from my perspective, it's a gift. It's a lifetime gift. And with regards to the Common Core and the content expectations and so on, you have to take students where they're at. And one of the things I like about, for example, Reading Mastery, you have an 80-20 concept. 80% of the content that you teach is review and 20% is new. So you have a high success rate. But when it comes to scheduling everything, you've got to be focused on letting kids leave to go to classes where they're going to not only be successful, but they're also going to be able to take themselves from one area or level and move forward and progress. That's the goal, because sometimes kids get turned off with regards to the reading programs that we offer and provide because they haven't been successful. Another thing I wanted to make you aware of, staffing. When you do a walk to read program, you may have staff members that don't necessarily have the experience with regards to the use of literacy programs. And building administrators, we all have a saying that you're only as good as your worst teacher. Well, direct instructional programs allow you to take a moderate teacher and make them an outstanding teacher, so long as they follow the actual script that's being used to instruct the students. So just want to make you aware that we had, in my circumstance with the implementation that I had in the work that I've done, I actually had to take several staff members. For example, I had a paraprofessional that I had to create a group because I didn't have enough staff members. You can be creative with that. I had special ed teachers that we used as small grouped. We had their students participate in a group, so we were providing the minutes that they needed. But we were able to actually get other staff members to do the actual program so kids can walk and we could have smaller groups. The other part is budgeting. I decided to go full immersion direct instruction in my particular school with connecting math concepts and also with reading mastery. And I departmentalized. I had a reading specialist that kids would see in the morning or afternoon, and then their schedule would reverse and go see their math, science, social studies specialist in the opposite time. That saved me a little bit of money on my budget, because when you purchase materials, if you had to buy a set for every single teacher, I wouldn't necessarily have the money to finance that. So I was a little creative with regards to being able to roll out the programs that I needed. I was able to purchase the materials for our students and also for the staff. But the interesting thing is, with regards to having a split departmentalized elementary building, students were able to get their instruction from an expert in their particular content area, which is what I wanted to do in my particular situation, because again, I was in a low achieving school with a high concentration of poverty. Kids were coming to school academically not ready. They didn't have the academic vocabulary and the skills. So I wanted to make sure that if I had those teachers in front of those students who were experts in their content areas, that you could accelerate their learning. Now I want to let you know I did a lot of research on the direct instructional programs. I already mentioned to you I was a practitioner. I used open court in the school district I worked in many years ago as I first initiated becoming a teacher in my career. I also used reading mastery and corrected reading in the work that I've done. But I want to make you aware if you're going to be successful on an adoption and implementation of any program, you have to have an instructional leader in the school that is able to not only know what it is that teachers are doing in the classroom, but you also have to be able to relate to what it is that they're dealing with regards to some of the things that they're dealing with on a daily basis that make it frustrating for them. So I put in there, there's a video you may want to take a look at. It's called The Principal Story, and it talks about instructional leadership, because that's really what we want our principals to be able to do. They want to be able to support what's the teaching that's happening in the classroom and the teachers that are teaching the content. I also want to make you aware that John Hattie's done a lot of research, and he has found a 0.59 effect size with regards to direct instruction. And anybody knows anything about John Hattie should know that the hinge point with the research that he's done is 0.40. Researchers raise their eyebrow anytime they see anything with an effect size of 0.40 or higher. And it's amazing to think about that, because a lot of us, particularly when we go to our professional development trainings around our areas, they don't promote this information. They don't make you aware of it. So if you get an opportunity to go to Visible Learning and you can find out other things about effectiveness and things that you could do with regards to your students in the classroom or with kids. But again, 0.59 is well above 0.40, and that significantly, effectively, and rapidly improves student achievement. It's been documented. Now, I want to also bring up Siegfried Ziegengelmann's name. He is actually the chairman for the National Institute for Direct Instruction. This is a gentleman that he's basically the father of direct instruction. If I could spend an hour with him, or have an opportunity to have a conversation with him, I think that would be a tremendous experience, because he is the expert in this area, and he has actually proven programs. I don't know if you're familiar with DISTAR, which was a special program that the government put together. Reading Mastery came out of it, and some of the other programs, but he is actually the individual that spearheaded a lot of this. Now, there's a couple websites I want to also make you aware of that I use to research some of the programs. There's one that's called the Best Evidence Encyclopedia. It's through Johns Hopkins University. There's a gentleman who's running it called Robert Slavin. When I researched the reading programs that are considered to be the most effective with kids in improving achievement, I found that reading mastery was coming up all the time. So was Connecting Math Concepts was coming up all the time in terms of math. Corrective reading was coming up frequently. And it's interesting to find that you can also find this information also on what's called the What Works Clearinghouse, which is through the U.S. Department of Education. So us as practitioners, if we're aware of these facts with regards to the research studies that have been happening, we can actually not only justify to our Board of Education, to our staff, but we also can be reassured that the programs that we're putting in place have a significant effect on kids and student learning, which is what we're all interested in. There's also a report that I want to make you aware of. It's called How the World's Most Improved School Systems Keep Getting Better. It came out in 2007 through the McKinsey Foundation. If you type that in on your URL or your browser, you're going to find a very amazing report that's going to indicate to you that if you are having a difficult time with regards to improving student achievement in your district, and if you're trying to do some things that are different or to improve it, direct instructional programs are one of the things that they mention in there that can significantly have an impact on student achievement at a very early stage of you trying to move it in a positive direction. So I suggest or recommend that you take a look at that particular study, because in that documentation and study, everything that I've just talked about with regards to direct instructional programs are in it. So I guess you could say it advocates it, particularly when you're in an area where you have kids that are struggling academically. Now, in terms of data management, one of the things that I like to do is I like to always look at the to-inform data that my teachers were entering into the system. That indicated to me how kids were performing using these types of programs, such as Reading Mastery, for instance, but it also allowed me to address whether or not my teachers needed some additional professional development, which will come down to the last bullet in a minute. If I saw that kids were lagging academically on the to-inform data, I always had an opportunity to not only conversate and look at the teacher, but I would always go in and observe what was happening in the classroom, but I would also address some job-embedded professional development needs. Also, when I went into classrooms to do my observations, I used the ConnectEd website frequently. I would go into a room, the teacher would be teaching the lesson, I would bring up the lesson on the ConnectEd website, the exact page, and sometimes I would even interject during the course of the lesson and take the lesson over for a short period of time with the students in the classroom, and then would yield and have the teacher continue. The kids kind of thought that that was neat. I'm not so sure my teachers were too appreciative of it at first, but they got kind of used to it and they kind of enjoyed it a little bit. It gave them a little bit of a break because you're constantly checking for understanding while you teach using a direct instructional program. So I enjoyed doing that. It gave me an opportunity to actually experience it as a teacher as well from a building administrator's perspective. But here's the most important thing I want to make you aware of to put this into perspective. In order for you to be successful in any adoption of any program, you have got to have job-embedded professional development. Not only for me as a building administrator, but for your staff. If you have a new implementation and you don't provide support for those teachers on a new adoption or an implementation of a new program, it's going to be a fail. You're not going to be successful. Because what's going to happen is teachers are going to go back to their old routines, they're going to continue to do what they've been doing, and that's not how you significantly, effectively, and rapidly improve student achievement when people go back to the way they've been doing things. You want to focus in on the program being taught with fidelity, you having a consultant coming in. Through my experiences, I always had a McGraw-Hill education consultant come into my schools. I would go in there with them. They provide feedback to the teachers. They would coach them on areas that they had some challenges in. Also, the teachers would have an opportunity to have a dialogue with these individuals in what I call a planning table meeting to actually ask them questions. What can I do better in this particular area? I'm having some difficulties on the mastery assessments and kids not being successful in this particular area. What can I do to remedy that? And so on. So just letting you know that that particular support, that aspect to any type of program is probably the most key and most important. So that's some of, from my perspective, some of my experiences that I've had using direct instructional programs, reading mastery, connecting math concepts, corrective reading, even the Horizons program, which was written by Siegfried Zig Engelman.
Hello, everyone. This is Tara Hart. I am with Marion County Public Schools, and I'm here today with Jamie Brazenton, who will come in if we have a question that needs to be addressed or to add anything to what I'm sharing. And if we move to the next slide, you can see there's some key points that we've learned here in Marion County. I am the Director of K-12 Reading and Professional Development, and Jamie is serving as our intervention specialist for elementary. So she is the boots on the ground doing all the work behind this implementation. Again, I want to reiterate something Mary's already mentioned. What we did in Marion County is we had originally started with an intervention program at the upper grades. There was legislation in Florida requiring us to intervene in the area of reading for students in grades 6 through 12 who were not passing the state assessment in reading. And we kept getting sixth graders coming in reading at a first and second grade level, and finally got enough collaboration between our elementary schools and secondary schools where they decided that intervening earlier was something that we needed to do. So we put together a proposal for our elementary principals, and really emphasized early intervention, really focusing on kindergarten and first grade, and we really try not to use the word intervention. We try to talk about acceleration, and the idea behind accelerating kids up to grade level so that they can get out of intervention and benefit from Tier 1 instruction. Our elementary schools had spent a lot of time putting kids on the computer for an intervention because it took less personnel. If the person teaching a particular program wasn't there that day, it didn't impact the kids' instruction, they could just go sit on the computer. And so our district had kind of gotten away from having people do interventions. And so we offered it as a pilot, and this is going into bullet 2 here. We did not say you have to do this because we knew that we would get immediate pushback. We actually told our administrators that they could do it. We gave them some things that they would have to do if they chose to participate in the pilot, but we also offered the materials be purchased by the district, and the training would be supported by the district. So they had lots of supports if they chose to buy in. We have 31 elementary schools, and we thought we might get 10. We ended up with 22 in the first couple months, and then once those 22 got on board, a couple more heard it was going well, and then they jumped on board. So at this point in time, we have all but just a couple of our elementary schools who have decided to get on board with this early intervention plan. What we did is, again, we provided the funding for the materials and the training and the district support in the form of Jamie Brazenton's position. We also held quarterly meetings with the principals and their professional development specialists at each school. So those professional development specialists at each school are part of the infrastructure and internal capacity that I'll talk about in the third bullet. But those administrators attended those quarterly meetings with their support people so that they learned throughout that first year how they should monitor the implementation, which was something that Mary talked about on her slides. We knew that we would have to address the infrastructure and internal capacity, and that had to be ready to fully implement these programs effectively. So when you talk about infrastructure, one of the key things we talked about was scheduling. Our schools had been used to kids being scheduled in a lab. So they had 30 minutes a day where they took their entire class down to a lab and they sat on a computer program and got their intervention that way. And we had to change that mindset, which was not an easy thing to do. So we had to work with all of our schools on how do you effectively schedule for interventions in this way. We had to look at the walk to read model like the superintendent just talked about, and we also looked at chunking their day into K2 and 3-5 and doing intervention blocks in the morning and the afternoon. We had to talk to our administrators about having teachers specialize in content areas, which also was mentioned earlier, in that teachers might teach the language arts and social studies for half the day, and then the other half of the day the kids would go to a different teacher for math and science. Just all kinds of different scheduling options and ideas out of the box of what we had been doing for 10 years. We also had to put the infrastructure in place for people to deliver these interventions. So we had to work with our Title I department about how can we fund people to support this, and we were able to put in intervention paraprofessionals using some of that funding. So a lot of this instruction, not all, we do have teachers delivering some as well, but a lot of this instruction is delivered by paraprofessionals. We also knew that we would need a person who could be the point person for this, and that's where we put a position in the staffing plan for an intervention specialist. So Jamie provides training and support for all of the different people who are delivering these programs. In our district, we are mainly using for those early intervention, reading mastery, early interventions in reading, and then the corrective reading is used at upper grade levels and also in middle school where kids may have come to us from another district but still need it. Internal capacity, we have the professional development specialists in place at every elementary school. Jamie has worked very hard to get them training that they need to support the implementation, and then to provide training for those who are delivering the instruction. So she has coordinated some of those practice sessions that you heard Mary talk about earlier, and we've worked with McGraw-Hill a lot on providing that type of ongoing training. The other thing that we've done is the coaching support, and I'll talk about that at the last bullet. The ongoing timely relevant support from the district, I'll talk about Jamie again here. She is there to provide schools what they need just in time, so when they need it. Sometimes you can provide things and people don't know they need it yet, but then when they realize they need it, they want it right then. And so Jamie has been key to making this work in our district. If we did not have her there, I think that we would have a lot of people falling through the cracks and things going unaddressed. So she is able to do that job quite well. And having that dedicated person is really important. The partnership approach to implementation, we knew from our experience with working with coaches or professional development specialists in the past that if there wasn't a partnership approach between them and the principal or the administrators at the school, and the coach was just responsible for everything, that the implementation would not be effective. The teachers have to know, the teachers and the paras have to know that the administrator knows what they're supposed to be doing, supports what they're supposed to be doing, is asking questions about what they're doing, and so it's really important that we have that partnership. We did bring our principals, assistant principals, and our coaches or professional development specialists in for a training where they all were together, and we focused on the book Building Teachers' Capacity for Success. The subtitle is A Collaborative Approach for Coaches and School Leaders, written by Pete Hall and Alyssa Simmerl, and it is an ASCD book. And we actually brought Pete Hall in, and he trained everyone all together, so they got the same message at the same time. And they created a coaching plan at the end of the session to kind of guide and direct their work for the year. So we really have emphasized that partnership approach. The last bullet is really addressing the coaching support, both external and internal. So externally, we did, like what was mentioned before, we have McGraw-Hill consultants that come out. We schedule them out at the schools. Jamie usually walks with the consultant when the consultant goes to the schools, so that she's there to see what the consultant sees and to provide support for those coaches who will then provide follow-up based on what the consultant sees. And then internally, we are working on a train the trainer for our coaches so that they know how to coach direct instruction programs effectively. And we also have our McGraw-Hill friends coming back in to coach the coach. So once the coaches have been trained on how to coach, they will come out and actually coach their coach, so that we are sure that everyone in the system is able to support successful implementation. And Jamie, anything to add? She's given me a thumbs up that I covered it all. I do not see any questions specific to anything that we've talked about, so I will go ahead and turn it back over to Mary.
Okay, thanks Tara, and thanks Shawn as well. I think your information was extremely valuable and wonderful to hear how those features actually come to life in an implementation. And again, both districts are doing a fabulous job and have some really strong success stories. So they would be great people to reach out to as well to, as I mentioned, partner with or get advice from as we go through it. So I'll take a moment and just look at a few questions that are down in the question box, if you give me just a moment here. So Brian, I think you have another question here. Reading Mastery does a great job with supplementing material with various projects, the fluency practice, decodable books, etc. But with regards to connecting math, there doesn't seem to be as much to add besides there's a book, a workbook, and remedies. What do you use for extra support or even motivation? Well, I will tell you, I think one of the great pieces that we developed along with the new Connecting Math concepts is actually the practice software. So I really hope your students are engaging and using that. In fact, the practice software is a great resource for practicing and applying the skills that they've learned. So there's a way to practice, say for example, math facts, both for accuracy and fluency, but also to extend beyond math facts to the other mathematical concepts they've been learning. And it's in a game-like format. It's formatted for the different grade levels. Every grade level looks a little different so that the background is appropriate for that student engagement. It's also really motivating because the students have a map that they go through and you can track their progress, and then of course there are reports for the teacher. It's also important to note that some of the standards are directly tied to that practice software, so make sure your students are engaged in using that. I think that's a great tool both for what you're asking in terms of motivating and extending their practice and support. So I think that would be great. And let me check on another question. There was another question about what is the research behind direct instruction. And I think Shawn alluded a little bit to that as well when he was discussing. Direct instruction comes to us with a long history of research validation. As Shawn mentioned, starting back in the follow-through project that was a government-led investigation, there is documentation to support the program with students. Each time that Zig Engelman and his author team develop a program, the program itself goes through extensive field testing prior to even it being available for use in the classroom. And by field testing, we mean it's in the hands of teachers and students, and we're also measuring that against performance-based assessments and how those students perform meeting grade level standards. So that's even prior to it being available, and then once the product is on the market, obviously we continue to do efficacy-based studies, both via McGraw-Hill but also external. We participate in a lot of studies that are funded through universities or districts. So there's a long history of research-proven effectiveness with the programs. In fact, it's probably, I would go out on the limb to say, one of the most research-based programs available on the market. It has this very long history. And not many programs can say they have a history of almost 50 years of support in the public school system. So, and you can also go onto the McGraw-Hill website and access our research page. If you go onto mheonline.com into the direct instruction microsite, you can also get into the research page and look up additional studies on the various programs. Another place you can do that, as Shawn mentioned, was NIFTY, the National Institute for Direct Instruction. Nifty.org is a place to go when you can actually go in and go through the entire database of research programs. You can sort it by program, by type of student, by age, by area. So there's a lot of great research out there if you're looking to read through that and take a look at it. So let me see if there's anything else. I think that would be good. So just a couple of reminders here as we close up. I wanted to let you know that on March 1st, we are offering another live conference event that will have some experts in the field of both literacy and math with direct instruction. People like Dr. Nancy Marchand Martella, Carolyn Schneider, Wayne Callender, and Kia Ellis will be joining us and presenting on various topics related to direct instruction. And just as this presentation, this is recorded, you'll be sent a recording, or even if you can't attend that live conference event on March 1st, if you go ahead and register, you'll receive a link, and if you can't attend, you'll still be sent a recorded version so that you can watch it on your own. You can register for that event at mheonline.com/DI-Leaders2016. Again, mheonline.com/DI-Leaders2016. Or you can go to our website and search it from there. So I just want to say that you'll receive a recording of today's presentation along with a PDF of the PowerPoint in case that's helpful to you. But I just want to close with a quote for you, and just a reminder to me every day as I approach my job. I really feel very strongly about education being the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. Being educated gives you opportunity, and we need to make sure that all of our students have that opportunity to be the best they can be and to give back to their community and to society. And we know that with our direct instruction programs, we have the opportunity to do that, and we do that on a daily basis with schools across the country and actually across the world too. So it's very exciting to be a part of that larger community. So I want to thank you for being with us on our live Hangout. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And watching the head and the screen was okay with you. It's a little bit different for us too, but we've really enjoyed it. And it's a great way that we can host an event and bring some speakers in to join us. So hopefully you enjoyed that and got a lot out of the session. There is a survey to follow up. If you do that, that would be great. We can also customize and look at your responses for our future events. So thank you for attending today, and thanks for everything you do for all the kids out there. So have a great day. Bye.